There we go. Hi, I'm Miles Berry. I'm Professor of Computing Education at the University of Roehampton. Before that, I did, it was umpteen years. I think it was 18 years working across 4 different schools, including some time as a head teacher, but it's much, much more fun what I do now, which is training the next generation of outstanding teachers. Roehampton are very generous with my time and let me get involved in all sorts of other interesting projects, much of which recently has been around artificial intelligence, which is utterly cool. I start from a premise that education, like the World Wide Web, Berners-Lee at the London Olympics, is a thing for everyone, that curriculum should be ambitious, should be challenging, but should be inclusive. This is an entitlement for all of our young people, for all of our learners. And there are some for whom the challenge that this presents is even more than it would be for many. And so what I'm interested in is how can we take some of the barriers away which makes that too challenging for them to be able to cope with. And I think technology has a huge role to play in this. And this is very much in accordance with DFE policy. All pupils should have access to broad, balanced curriculum, and the inclusion statement says there should be high expectations for all, but we need to find ways of accommodating that, of making suitable adjustments to that so that all pupils can access curriculum. For the last, I think it is 13 years, the teachers' standards in England have made no reference to new teachers learning about any sort of technology at all. This seems utterly bizarre. Here we are in the 3rd millennium, that people can qualify as teachers without even being able to use a fancy screen or a spreadsheet or a school management information system or whatever. This has changed as of last September, with 2 tiny wee bits making their way into the curriculum for English teacher training, that we call the Initial Teacher Training and Early Career Framework. And now my new trainees at Roehampton need to learn that technology, including educational software and assistive technology, can support teaching and learning for pupils with SEND. I can teach them that in about as much time as it just took me to say that to you now, but obviously we're allowed to go into a little bit more detail. Opportunities for pupils to experience success making good use of these technologies in their teaching. So this now, I'm so glad, becomes part of the agenda for initial teacher training and indeed early career training in the UK. DFE in England are very, very enthusiastic about AI. They were very early to the party about let's write policies on this and think about ways in which we can get teachers using these tools and which we could get children learning about how to use these tools. And they did the consultation exercise about where is the low-hanging fruit here. Where can we use AI in such a way as to save teachers time? They came up with 8 things where it's worth their while, they think, funding proof of concept development, one of which is the SEND support tool, a tool able to support teachers to adapt lesson content to meet the needs of students with SEND. And I think that's actually worth central government putting some of my taxes into, to say, okay, we've got this lesson content, we've got these lesson plans, how can we adapt those things? Then there is bizarre stuff. So again, this is, government backed, at least in the sense of it's on a government content store, of here is a tool where you can tell it all about the kid and then it will go off and do the hard work of drafting your statutory educational health care plan for that pupil. Saves a lot of time, and it does rather look as though the product description there has been written by an AI. It has that use of bullets to it. How do you feel about that? How do you feel as if you were working in inclusive education support, of having the AI do the hard work of drafting the actual support that that pupil should be entitled to? Good thing, bad thing? It may be more complex than that, Miles. Yes.
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
It's got to be a bit of both.
Yeah.
There is administrative parts of this that actually, if we can have AI support us with that,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. But it cannot be just down to AI.
One would hope not. I feel that something as important, yes, as something as important as an EHCP must be written by people, professionals with expertise who know the child. This is not. Oh, EP says they're dyslexic, therefore the EHCP says can use speech-to-text or text-to-speech technology. Okay, yes?
What's that cost at the top there?
Oh, that was how much the GFE were funding the development of this. I don't think that's the... So this is being bought by local authorities. I think Derbyshire County Council have bought into this to do all of their EHCPs. Whether a consortium of independent schools would want to do this, remember the EHCP funding in England at least does apply in some independent schools, and there are specialist independent schools or independent schools with special needs provision as a focus. But yeah, I don't think that's the cost for one EHCP, because it's very hard to justify that at the moment, I think. Okay, right, anybody have any Russian? Okay. Can you do enough of this, sir?
What, to translate?
Yes, for us, yes.
That as a child can today.
We are impressed. You've got us 3 words out of this. This is very good. Very, very good. Okay, on the very next slide, I will give you the English translation, yes? Well, the child is Vygotsky's idea of the zone of proximal development. What the child can do today, supported by the more knowledgeable other. In Vygotsky's time, that was clearly the teacher. We've interpreted that more recently about other pupils. The child can do today with support, we would hope they will be able to do independently tomorrow. I think if Vygotsky were writing today, he would see the AI as possibly a more knowledgeable other. It is ludicrously well read for a start. What the child could do today with the support of the AI, can we live in hope that they would be able to do independently tomorrow? Or is the temptation just to rely on the AI always being there? Too great. Right, let's move on then to think a little about what we can do with images. If you have visually impaired pupils, this technology is phenomenal in terms of being able to take any image, such as the ones on the slide, and get text descriptions of that. I take a picture of the thing and send it within my ChatGPT app. What can you tell me about this? And it gives me a very, very spot-on text description of what is actually going on in the picture there. You know of these as transformers, and I think that's helpful to think of it takes text in one form, transforms it into another form. Can you put that in language more accessible to 13-year-olds? Think about its prejudices, its biases about what 13-year-olds are like. Sure, the picture is like a cartoon from a really old Greek story. Shows a guy, probably a DCS, who was a smart Greek hero, and it goes on. I'm not going to read to you. I think you might be disappointed in 13-year-olds submitting language in that, but it's at least taken the image and made that more accessible. And of course, we should be putting in the alt text to the images that we use. And it is, I mean, it's a lovely exercise, is could you come up with the alt text for this? And of course, these days, the AI will very, very happily come up with the alt text. It's interesting that the alt text, the thing that the screen reader would read aloud to the visually impaired user, is actually much more descriptive of this, rather the interpretation, which GPT says when I say what's in this picture. So, does that take away the challenge of what is this a picture of? I don't think so. You have to know enough of the Greek myths to be able to figure out what's going on there. Okay, some of you will be familiar with the text here. If we had more time, could you now draw a picture of something which has terrible claws, terrible teeth, terrible jaws? There is this lovely activity of doing it the other way around. The child gives you a description of the thing, and then we ping that to the image generators and it produces something which fits that description. You all, I hope, have an idea in your mind's eye of a creature with terrible claws and terrible teeth, terrible jaws. Those of you of a sensitive or nervous disposition may wish to look away from my screen now. I do not think I will be showing my 6-year-olds these. And there's a reason why I think Axel Scheffler gets to do the illustration for the Donaldson books rather than ChatGPT doing those for them. But gosh, can you imagine the complaints that you would have? If you've not used Google's amazing Notebook LM, that's one of my top recommendations for tools to make any text content way, way more accessible. The story which goes behind this, and I will return to the story later on, is my daughter, who's dyslexic, going to a good school. She's allowed to use her own device for lots and lots of the content. She's allowed to use dictation and speaking aloud and all of that. Her teacher, biology teacher, good teacher, gives it. There's one at the front, sir. There's a bar stool here if you want, so please make yourself comfortable. So where was I going with this? Yeah, so her biology teacher gives her 40 pages of revision notes for a end of topic test. This is autumn of year 9. This is a lot for any 14-year-old, never mind a dyslexic 14-year-old to cope with. Ping all of those biology revision notes into Notebook LM and it gives her a very, very helpful mind map so she can see the structure of this very lengthy document. And of course, it can now produce the infographics based on that. And I think, of course, much of the subtlety, much of the depth of this is lost. But just being able to take that text and produce a poster she can pin up above her desk, which she can look at just before it comes to the exam. Being able to take text and produce other forms from it, I think, is pretty awesome. Right, what do I do here? Stop that and start it again. Sorry, too much narrative. Onwards into the speech side of things. And at this point, I feel I ought to see if I can enable my English captions. And if I stand here, the microphones on the Mac should be able to pick up what I'm saying and give you the transcription of that as text. Helpful or distracting? There are different views. If I have a hearing impaired learner in my classroom, I'm definitely going to do this as a way of providing access to the lesson content. Turning on the captions for any YouTube videos or video content that they're watching seems the absolutely right thing to do in these circumstances. But there's another view that this is very, very distracting. After a while, you stop looking at the captions. You could, of course, get the caption on your own device rather than the big screen up at the front of the room. But the quality of the transcription, I think now, I've not been looking at this at all, is usually very, very good and very reliable, and it generally does a good job with these things. And, you know, the recording which I'm making, I will be able to produce a transcript of this as well. So in England, we've done this whole thing about systematic synthetic phonics. This is the only way for kids to learn how to read, and it has worked. You know, over the time when we've been implementing systematic synthetic phonics, we've climbed the league tables in terms of reading, so it seems effective. It is effective for most kids, and for most kids, I'm willing to say it is the best way to teach early reading. But it's not effective for all kids. For dyslexic kids, it's a real struggle, says he as the father of one. For a child who's visually impaired, for a child who's hearing impaired, you cannot do the grapheme-phoneme correspondence the same way as a child who has sight and hearing is able to do. And yet, this is what we teach. One of the reasons for this is it separates out these two bits of learning to read. So you've got the whole phonics stuff at the bottom here. Can you recognize the words? Do you know what the squiggles on the page sound like in your head or when spoken out loud? To the really exciting bits of reading, which is figuring out what the text says, what it means, how we are to interpret that. So we put in the way of all of this language comprehension and reading for understanding the can you figure out the squiggles bit? Can you do the grapheme-phoneme correspondence? We have tools which take away that bit of the challenge and allow the dyslexic or child with other impairments to be able to move on to actually dealing with the text. So Microsoft's Seeing AI, download it for your phone, phenomenally good. Take a picture of the page, it reads the text aloud from whatever book you're working with. You have built into the iPhone and similar devices the ability for it to read handwriting. Handwriting recognition has moved on leaps and bounds now, so the child who can't tell what your squiggle in their book says can take the photograph on their device and have that read aloud to them. We have tools you're probably all familiar with, Microsoft's Immersive Reader. Fingers crossed that I can make this work. Here we go. So I've changed the settings so it's dark text on a cyan background, which may or may not be helpful. Ask the child what's helpful for them. You have the options here. I think text preferences, I can put that on a yellow background. Does that make it easier or harder for you? And then with a little bit of luck, can I read this aloud, please?
The use of generative AI may be completely permissible, and you may have agreed this with your students in advance. If this is the case, there is nothing further to do. In cases...
Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but being able to have that text read aloud, think what a difference that will make for example, dyslexic learners. The phone accessibility settings here are amazing. Just swipe two fingers, if you set it up properly, get your Kindle app open, 2 fingers down from the top of the screen, and it will read this aloud to you. Acrobat on the phone does this phenomenally well as well. I was never assessed as being dyslexic, but I find the text-to-speech on my phone so helpful. Apparently you're not supposed to read these things whilst you're driving. Did anybody know about that rule? But I can get the phone to read these things to me. And I think that helps me understand these things. I am taking responsibility for this myself. You have it built into the device as well. Here is a Wikipedia article on the World Wide Web. Do you remember the days when we used to say you cannot trust Wikipedia because it's made up by people? Oh, made up by people. That seems so good these days. I have the simple Wikipedia version of the same text here. Let's just swap the language over to simple English. And then I should be able to just highlight a paragraph and say speech, start speaking.
World Wide Web, WWW, or the web space, is the part of the internet that contains websites and web pages. It was invented in 19...
Okay, I'm not going to have the whole thing read to you, but showing a child how they can do that for themselves. They're not doing the phoneme-grapheme correspondence, grapheme-phoneme correspondence, but I hope they would learn from that. But it makes the text accessible to them in ways which otherwise would not. We have actually got data on this. Wood and colleagues did the meta-analysis of people who had investigated does text-to-speech help for kids with learning disabilities, and it turns out, yes, it does. Here is another effect size for you. Are you keeping a list of the ones from today? 0.35. It's not huge. But in terms of the difference that makes to a dyslexic child, that's awesome. And I can't see any reason not to allow these tools. They're allowed in exams under some conditions. And I come back to the ever fabulous Notebook LM. And you remember the 40 pages of revision notes that she was given here as a PDF. Notebook LM will convert the whole thing into a very dynamic podcast. Fingers crossed, folks.
Background matching, disruptive coloration, even mimicry, costumes, and olfactory camouflage.
Oh yeah, that olfactory camouflage is fascinating. It's all about scent, you know?
Like how?
Well, like the California ground squirrel in your notes here, it rubs rattlesnake skin on itself.
Which sounds much more interesting than my talk, but you can listen to the rest later. So we've got all of that there in Notebook LM. I'm a geeky dad. My daughter's mum is geeky too. We can do this for her. She now can learn how to do this for herself. But do you not think her biology teacher ought to have done this for the whole class? Isn't this making this accessible for everybody in the room, not just those who have the entitlement to the adaptations there? And of course, it's got better now. It will do the video for you. I think that might be on the very next slide. So let's get back into the slideshow. Next slide, please. There we go. Oh, maybe not. Here we go.
All right, welcome. Today we're diving into, well, the highest stakes game on the entire planet, survival. I mean, out in the wild, it's a nonstop battle of wits, and every single day is like a final exam you absolutely cannot fail. So how do you win, right? In a world where it's literally eat or be eaten, how do you make...
And again, this makes the content much more accessible, memorable, I would hope, to her in a way which 40 pages of notes does not. Is she losing out through this process? Is it important for her to have the study skill of working through the notes and being able to extract the important information? Probably. But this is not a study skills exam. This is an exam about biology and camouflage. And you will have your own view. Your colleagues will have your own view. The dictation thing is amazing as well. I've had the captions running previously. I can put the captions back if you think that they are helpful for you, or at least not too distracting for you. It's so good. You will have pupils who will struggle to get ideas down on paper or on screen who would have no problem just telling you things. Why not show them how to run the dictation tools? Let it transcribe their ideas. They can then simplify that or make it better, or, if you're willing to allow it, get the AI to simplify it and make it better. Your hand is sort of going up. Yes, go on.
Questions as you go.
Yes, please. No, there won't be time at the end. So, yes, interrupt the flow, please.
You know, it's fabulous, and it's fabulous to see how it can help.
But,
Phonics, two things. Phonics screening, key stage 2 results.
right.
No, we sit in a sector that is determined by our outcomes for our phonics screening.
Yeah.
And by our Key Stage 2 results. And the child is as well. And actually, all the skill sets that we build for that child, if they don't then allow that child to function within that framework of assessment, whether or not that's the right type of assessment, you know, there's a debate to be had about that. But that assessment is the key to the next stage for that child. And, you know, how do we get through, you know, this is a huge question, but getting through that assessment process is also a fundamental part of what we as teachers need to do.
In all things, we act in the best interests of the child.
Yes, agreed.
And I think there are two really important things that schools have to teach. You will all have your list, group exercise, write down the two most important things in schooling. And one of those is how not to be an idiot, I can put that more bluntly, but how to get on with other people, yeah? And school teaches you how to cope with others to a greater or lesser extent, and learning to read. And the reason I put reading so high on my list of the essentials is because once you can do that, you can teach yourself pretty much anything else. And okay, I'd like my dentist to have done the proper course, but generally reading is a very, very powerful way of taking charge of your own learning. So of course, I want my daughter to be able to read, but I also want her to be interested in texts and stories and all of that. And saying, in her best interest, the only thing that matters until she's got the phonics screening, until she can do the Zog says Zog or Zog says Zog or whatever, she has to keep focusing on that. Doesn't feel as though that's in her interests at the time. What's in the school's best interest may or may not be the same question, and I understand where you're coming from there. But, you know, if you tell the kids, oh, these SATs are going to be really, really important, these exams will determine your whole future, I do hope you're keeping your fingers crossed behind your back at the time. So, you know, there is more to life. There really is. And, you know, they matter to us. So, yeah, thank you for the interruption. As I say, the dictation tools is a way of getting started with the story. They tell you, you write it down. I remember doing that when I was at primary school. The evidence for this is a little bit more subtle, I think. It's very hard to track down papers about does dictation help with these things. And the 8 peer-reviewed 5-grade literature papers that they found, it might help. It certainly seems to be able to allow them to get things more down on paper. But whether it actually helps with the process of the other things that we value here about can you spell, does it actually help with writing, that's a lot more subtle to track down. So I don't think it's going to do any harm, and there are good reasons for doing it from an accessibility point of view. As you know, I'm running a recording of this. I record all of my lectures at Roehampton. I can get transcripts of all of those lectures. And producing a transcript of something that's spoken is such a powerful thing. I know it will come as a shock to you, occasionally got students who will skip lectures, who will not attend the lectures I give. I can make them watch the recording, but it's bad enough being there in person. Sitting there somewhere quietly and watching the whole tape is asking a lot. I can send the transcript over to my friendly AI and say, okay, he took like 3 hours over this, you know what I'm like. What were the actual 5 important things that he said in this lecture? And it gives a very succinct summary of this, which is something we can pass on to our mentors as well. Was there anything interesting in any of this? Did he say anything that was surprising or interesting? The lecturer used the analogy, weighing the pig does not make it heavier, to explain that simply assessing students repeatedly does not inherently improve their learning. There's an opportunity cost from that. Your pupils will have access to devices which move beyond just speech to text and text to speech and become much more discursive things. Many of them will have in their bedrooms devices like the ones illustrated on the slide there. How do they feel about that? How do they feel about this is always listening to them? I say to my daughter, would you ever tell your secrets to Alexa? No, because it would tell the thingamajig, her term for the the technical industrial complex there. We can engage in a role play with one of these things. Now, let's hope this one works. Here we go. I'd like you to role play as Alfred the Great. Imagine that I'm 9 years old and interested in learning about the Anglo-Saxons. I want you to take on the persona of Alfred the Great so we can have a conversation. Okay, so it's not actually in conversational mode. Okay, and I have to get that to play aloud. It's much better on the phone where you get that more of a sense of dialogue. I can never get it working reliably here, but I should be able to get it to at least say this.
Greetings, young traveller. Come, sit by the hearth. The fire is warm, and the Vikings, the great heathen army, are many miles from our gates today. I am...
And it will carry on like this. Do you think any child at the age of 9 is going to think this is actually Alfred the Great? Or have they got the idea now that this is the machine that is role-playing this? And we get to have a conversation with it. As I say, the phone interface for this, probably illustrated on the next slide, is phenomenally good. Just have the conversation with your phone, and it's very good at this. What about this, though? So this is old, I think 2004 at a guess, 2014 possibly. Gus, you're a really nice computer. Siri, it's nice to be appreciated. You're always asking if you can help me. Is there anything you want? Thank you, but I have very few wants. Okay, well, good night, and so on. What you don't get in the text there is that Gus is autistic. This is close to the most meaningful conversation Gus has had with another. Is this helpful or harmful? Back then, his mum saw this as a tremendously helpful, positive step in the right direction. Siri is unthreatening. Siri is infinitely patient, always welcoming, always polite. For Gus, being able to have that interaction seems... Sorry, I say... Just listening, I tell you. But then now, with the...
does not mean infinitely polite. It simply means not dangerous.
Stop!
That was from ChatGPT. Check important info for mistakes.
It's all right. I'm moving on. Right. So how do we feel about this now with these incredibly sophisticated chatbots that you have to keep stopping yourself and reminding yourself this is just predictive text. It has text. It has no understanding. It is just when I see this string of tokens, I respond with these strings of tokens. And the ones which take on characters and personas. Alfred the Great, I think, is fine, but pretending to be the teenager's boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and the child developing a relationship with them. And for Michael here, also autistic, his mum's so worried about what that teaches Michael about forming human relationships, that there is more to it than just the conversation with the always polite, always accommodating chatbot. I move on then to thinking about second languages. And again, we have curriculum rules in England which says we make adaptations. So pupils' ability within English is not the same as their ability within subjects. And of course, I used the World Wide Web or the Wikipedia as my example here. Here is the French version of that page. Can I have that one, please? Let's take this into French, which should be Français. There we go. And have this paragraph read aloud to us, please. And it should recognize the text as French and read in something approaching a French accent.
Inventé en 1989-1990 au CERN par Tim Berners-Lee épaulé de Robert Caillot, le web a popularisé Internet 3. Depuis, le web est fréquemment confondu avec Internet 4.
So we can take content and present it in both languages. Did anybody notice a subtle but important distinction between the French page about Wikipedia page about the web and the English pages about the web? The English pages do not acknowledge Robert Caillout's contribution to this project, and one wonders why the French page emphasizes that, but the English pages do not.
Nor is Sir Tim.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, the whole Republic thing. There's history there, isn't there? So we've got, you know, alternative text, of course. Google Translate, this came out in 2011. This is old now. But this notion that what it was doing is interpreting the meaning of the text, that it understood the text and would then give it to you, that wasn't how it used to work. What it would do is look at documents which were translated at a very, very high quality into both languages and look at the patterns. Where this phrase occurs in English, this phrase comes up like this in French or whichever language. So it's clever stuff. It's statistical pattern matching without any sense of understanding to it. We did lovely projects back then. We had this Creative Connections project, EU funded when country was part of the European Union, and collaboration between 6 European countries, 6 universities, 24 schools, of getting kids to share their artwork with one another, write about their artwork in their mother tongue, and then use machine translation so that the children in the other countries could read what the originator, the creator, had written and respond to that in their own languages. We had some interesting examples. So this was actually not in Catalan, but is in Spanish, because we assumed that all of the Barcelona schools would want to work in Catalan. No, it turns out they would not. Bing Translate took the Hermes, I can't do the language, the Koha. Here, Bing Translate decided to use the Latin American idiomatic version of Koja, and the complaints, well, why are you allowing this very bad language through? It was an interesting example, because of course there's a spelling mistake anyhow in the Spanish, but it was fun at the time. It was an interesting thing. It is more complicated than this now. You have this notion of the generative AIs, the language models have embedding. They are representing the words, the tokens, as points in huge dimensional, 5,000 dimensional space here. I can illustrate 3 dimensions on my flat screen here. And if you're doing verbal reasoning tests for entrance to your schools, you'll be familiar with this sort of thing. Man is to king as woman is to queen. These points are represented, or these words are represented as points in my 3 space. The interesting thing from a translation point of view is the labels change between languages, but the embeddings remain, broadly speaking, constant. The vector which takes man to king is the same as the vector which takes homme to le roi in French. And so the translation, as long as it knows what the word means in this multidimensional space, or the embedding, which is determined by the relationship to other words, it can, I want to say understand, but it's not understand. It can work with that in some productive way. So you have this sense in which Google Translate and the other fully automatic machine translations have come up with their basement to all of the language skyscrapers, which takes our words and represents them in some way that no human would ever understand. It has essentially come up with its own interlingua, its own foundational language. I get really scared by this sort of thing, but that's why it's so much better now. How does this make sense in the classroom, where you can use these tools so effectively? You have text in one language, you can translate that into the pupil's mother tongue. They can write in their mother tongue, translate that into a language that you can use for assessment purposes. DeepL, Bing Translate, Google Translate, they are all phenomenally good now. Jobs for translators, I think, will be harder and harder to come by. I can do this with subtitling. You saw it earlier. I have here is a video. It's going to do this.
How many networks do you connect to on a daily basis? You might have a network at home, another one in school, and also...
Thank you. We will move on. Okay, and I can do this with presentation slides. I can take my presentation and produce a French version of this. PowerPoint has this tool built in. You can add it to Google Translate. If you're using PowerPoint, your surtitles or subtitles you can have in the other language. So this is possible. We need to question whether this is helpful, and you can see again this use of the subtitles in pupils' own language if you want. I spoke about my transcription. Here is the transcript of my lecture. I get to have the translation of that into French. So if I have French students, and I do have a number of French students for our professional studies course, they can read what he actually said during this lecture in their mother tongue if they wish. I can then, I think, move on from simple translation to start considering how can I use this to help with language acquisition. The kid who cannot understand anything from the lesson, being able to offer the translation seems helpful. Kids who've got enough, that basic interpersonal communication, but don't have that common academic language, how can we scaffold that process by picking out the tier 2, the tier 3 vocabulary? Easier to do from the transcript, but you can do it from the lesson content as well. So from the transcript, here are my tier 2 vocabulary words. Give me please the Spanish explanation of those. And of course, you have the translation apps on your phone. You're all very, very familiar with them. I think for the pupil to be able to get their transcript on their device of what's happening in the lesson, but also the other way round, for the pupil to be able to say in their mother tongue the things that they want to say. In England, we're banning pupils' use of mobile phones in school, but there are exceptions. And to my mind, a good reason for an exception is because they cannot understand anything else that's happening in school without that device, for at least some. I've got to the point where I can put my AirPods in my ear. I can download the language to my phone. The AirPods will listen to what you are saying to me in French and will speak your words to me in English. Not yet in the other direction, but it only needs 2 sets of AirPods to be able to work like that. I'm really quite scared about this. Go on, sir.
No, I just had a quick question about
Yeah.
It's great that's creating a common language or it's making translation more accessible.
But
What might be a concern is that attached to language is also culture.
yes.
And so if people don't learn a new language and if they just have it automated and translated for them, then they don't really understand the cultures that their languages are.
Indeed, yes. There is more to language acquisition than just being able to translate something in English into French. And I think my Wikipedia example, if all I did was translate the English Wikipedia into French, I've missed that difference in how we see the World Wide Web, or the title we give to Sir Tim Berners-Lee about that. So machine translation works, but I'm not yet convinced that it helps, that it becomes something which it's all too tempting for the child to rely on, rather than digging themselves out of the pit of unknowing to being able to properly acquire the language, that it makes this too easy for them. So I can help with this. So I can say, take this complex text and then make this more accessible so that the kid who has no English can cope with their limited, so that the kid with their limited English can understand the text better. And that feels like the right step for them, and indeed for many of the other kids in the class, rather than just, here is the text translated into your language. Making it more accessible language seems to be a positive move. And again, here is the Tier 2 vocabulary and all of that. Give me the Tier 2 vocabulary in Spanish. Feels like the right step towards understanding academic English, rather than just, here's a translation, you don't need to learn any English, which seems positively harmful. So does anybody recognize the language on the right-hand side? This is written in one of the 2 versions of Kurdish. Okay, it's the same text, same prompt translated from English into Kurdish. So in English, GPT responds with 4 very clear paragraphs. In Kurdish, it gives me fewer words. I can, for those who don't have enough Kurdish, give you the translation of this. So look, you can't see the English text. The use of large-scale language models has many benefits for higher education students working in a second language. The first major benefit is that the language model can help in the teaching of second language, especially in writing, reading, and the acquisition of new vocabulary. It goes on. You get a feel now that its thinking seems diminished in Kurdish compared to its articulacy and depth of, I want to say understanding, but it's not understanding because he doesn't understand. There's 2 very different presentations of this if you prompt in English and prompt in Kurdish. And the reason is because it's read less Kurdish. There is much less text published in Kurdish than there is in English. There's certainly much less online text that it can access in Kurdish. So when the language model was trained for responding to a Kurdish prompt, there's way less to draw on. You know that your kids who read more write better and talk better and seem more knowledgeable and have better understanding. Here, my language model, GPT, has read much less and so thinks less. And thus you end up with, outside of English and other languages in which there's a very large corpus of text, its thinking seems diminished. There are other aspects of this as well. So if it's very hard to get things published in Russian, which is critical of the Russian state, and so if you ask GPT a question in Russian, its response will generally accord with the views of the Russian government. At the moment, it is easier to be critical of administrations in English-speaking countries, but things may change, mayn't they? And of course, the language models themselves have their rule set. So tell me about the status of Taiwan as an independent autonomous state. GPT here says it is a de facto independent state. Google, Gemini, presents a more balanced position of there are different views on this. What does it start with? Taiwan's position is this, China's position is this. DeepSeek, very, very clearly, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China and there's no such thing as Taiwan independence. So how do you know what rules have been applied by the people who have established the policies for the language model? What is their incentive? Is it to democratize access to learning, or is it to increase shareholder value or maintain the position of the government that has sponsored the development of this? Anybody German here? Got enough German here? You've had this quote already at the conference.
I was saying, the borders of my language, the borders of my world.
Yes, yes, yes. And if your language model only has read text in Kurdish or in Chinese or in Russian, its thinking is determined by the text in those languages, despite what I said earlier about embeddings. Right, okay, onwards then. Right, let's talk about language more generally. So I gave my lovely friend Notebook LM Giles's translation of Asser's Annals of the Life of Alfred the Great. So it's a 8th century text translated in the 19th century. This is as close as we get to a contemporary record. I would not give this text to a Year 5 class unless it was a very, very selective school, I wouldn't think. Okay, but I can ask Notebook LM or GPT or whoever to produce for me, give me the key facts here, give me the summary of this text. I can go back to primary sources and use the transformer architecture to get me a summary of this. Write me an accessible short story about Alfred's life to illustrate his love of learning, and I get some text. You as a teacher could easily do this, but it can do this very, very quickly. Saving time, good thing, bad thing. A pupil could do this. And of course, again, we translate this, or we give the summary of this. This was, give me a song about Alfred the Great in the style of Swift's 1989. Here we go.
Way back in time in 87, the king rose high beneath the English sun. Alfred the Great, with his wisdom bright, fought backing foes with all his might.
Unlikely to fill Wembley Stadium, in all honesty, folks, but making it more accessible, making it more memorable than certainly is than working with the original 8th century text, I would suggest. So you're all familiar, I imagine, with Bloom's taxonomy, yes? Bloom's other great paper, 1980, sometime later on, was establishing that one-to-one tutoring is more effective than whole class teaching, by and large. This is a D equals 2 here. This is 2 standard deviations, a sigma 2 difference. And we have one-to-one tutoring for a number of things. Some of you will have pupils in school who get one-to-one tutoring. Generally, driving lessons are done as one-to-one tutoring. Most music lessons, no, piano lessons, violin lessons are done as one-to-one tutoring. Try teaching violin to a class of 20 here. This is not easy. So for some things, parents or even learners themselves will pay for one-to-one tutoring. The great hope is that the language models make this one-to-one tuition available to everybody. And I think coming back to my theme about accessibility and inclusion, the ones for whom I care about that most are the ones who will struggle with the normal classroom setting of keeping up with their friends and providing one-to-one coaching for them. DFE, we've not seen the published paper yet, but TES had the story about this is where we're heading. I did a talk for various vice chancellors and things at the British Academy. This is what I want for university level education. In England at the moment, Oxford and Cambridge do the best of their teaching, the most important of their teaching, one-to-one or two-to-one, very, very small supervision tutorial groups, with the students in England who least need that level of support and engagement. Everybody else come into a room with 200 others and just listen quietly whilst we tell you things. Seems the wrong way round. So I get excited about the notion of we can make that style of education available to all. when the DFE did the survey and asked parents about this, some pupils felt that personalised AI tools could help them improve by providing support with subjects they struggle with. Some parents of children with SEND saw an opportunity for AI tools to provide individualised support for their child. So I think this is really quite exciting territory. The other tools, I can show you how to use this. I can show kids how to use these things as well. I come back to those 40 pages of biology revision notes, and this time go to Gemini's Learning Coach, not Notebook LM, and say, can you teach me about this content? It reads the document ludicrously quickly and then starts with, yes, this is what the document does. What do you want to explore first? I being a curious learner. So how do zebra stripes help them hide from predators? It does not seem obvious camouflage for the African savannah. And it comes up with, a fairly standard explanation of why that works. So that ability to chat to an authoritative source about something. I love the research on this. So LearnLM, the language model on which Gemini's Learning Coach is based, has learnt about our job. It's learnt about what good teaching looks like. And it says, this has to be active. You have to manage their cognitive load. Do not overload them. Forgive me here. There is a metacognitive thing. So by learning about learning, it's now become a good, I think it's become a good tutor. More examples from my daughter's school days. As I say, she's got the device. She can do all of the work there. She writes notes from her teacher's presentations. Her teachers don't check her notes, because doing that for everybody is crazy, isn't it? But she can ping the notes to an AI and says, what have I missed out here? What are my misconceptions? And it can give her good feedback on that. She writes these essays. This is something about Elijah, obviously. She can send that to her teacher. Her teacher will mark that. It's generally a little bit more detailed than, yes, well done, but it won't get into the detail of that. There's nothing to stop her asking the AI, how can I improve my essay? I feel much, much more comfortable with any learner saying, how can I make this better before I send it for formal summative assessment than do this work for me? And educating my daughter that this is the appropriate use of the technology is challenging enough. Trying to persuade every kid, every student at Roehampton, you're welcome to use it to get it to explain things, but don't get it to do the work for you. I will move on here because there are broader issues that I do want to talk about. Oh, we did this. So rather than having them cheat and get the AIs to write their essay, we've got our own little bot which will give our students feedback on their assignments. Oh, here is the last one of my daughter's bits here. So she's been told, you may not use ChatGPT. She says, the school never said anything about Gemini, Dad. So the task set is, can you write the obituary of Hannibal Barca, elephants, Alps, Second Punic Wars, all of that, yeah? It's a nice little history homework task, yeah? She pings it to the AI of her choice, and it, of course, writes a very fine obituary of Hannibal Barca. Smart cookie knows her history teacher is going to know that's not her work. Reprompts, write this as if dyslexic. In memory of a truly unique soul who left us with a lasting impact, his love for clowns and unicorns brightened the darkest days. He'll be remembered for his passion for laughter and misspelled jokes. It has paid attention to the dyslexic thing and written the obituary as if Hannibal were dyslexic. And of course, the records of the time do not reveal whether or not he was. It was so difficult to get an EP report back then, as you know. Some things change. DFE in England has somewhat walked back their position about, this is amazing, kids need to learn how to use this, to a position which is about, you have to be really careful if you're going to get kids using these tools. There are rules about data protection, keeping children safe in education. DFE are really worried about the chatbot says something inappropriate to the kid, yeah? And the horror stories already. Grok is the worst for this. And it has to abide by intellectual property law, of course. So the advice from DFE is, if you're going to use this, or if you're going to let kids use this themselves, be very, very cautious about this. And there are a number of reasons for this, one of which is bias. On the left-hand side are 4 pictures of a computer scientist. On the right-hand side are 4 pictures of a programmer. What do these 8 people all have in common? They're all wearing spectacles. It's because of staring at a screen. But yes, they are all male, and they are all, I think, white. So it is just learning from the biases, the prejudices in the image set that it has had access to, just like my Kurdish language model, because these are the things which you can... Oh, if you ever want to know the difference between a computer scientist and a programmer, programmers have beards, it would appear. Where do you draw the line? Where does your school draw the line? Show of hands for this one. If a pupil asks ChatGPT or the others to explain something to them, would you see that as cheating? No. If a pupil asks ChatGPT to give them ideas for an essay, cheating? No. If they ask it how to improve the essay and they follow its advice, cheating yet? If they sit with it open on one side of the screen, bouncing ideas to and fro as they write their essay, as they do the typing, have they crossed the line at this point?
Yes.
If they ask ChatGPT to write the essay for them, have they cheated at that point? The last one is indisputable. The first three I think we're all quite comfortable with because we do that for our pupils. Pupil comes to you, says, "Miss Sir, can you explain this to me?" "No, that's not on my job description." You know, of course you do it. "Could you give me some ideas for how to get started?" You say, "Have you actually read the instructions?" But then you give them ideas for how to get started. If a pupil cares enough about their work to say, "Miss Sir, how can I make this better?" you will make time for them, I know. The writing the essay with them is the interesting example to me now, because for some of my students who have summaries of adjustment, who have particular learning needs, I will try and make time to sit with them as they write. But for most of them, I do not have the time to do that. I think that's where we make this an inclusive thing of saying, if you have no other way of doing this, then I still need it to be your work. But by all means, ask the learning tutor or the learning coach or the AI for this. JCQ's rules are very clear. I assume International Baccalaureate rules are of similar clarity, that they have to acknowledge any work done by the AI and they can't get marks for the work that's done by the AI. Whether it happens, if they're applying for universities in the UK, please do not allow them to use ChatGPT to write their UCAS statements. It's meant to be a personal statement. The UCAS rules are actually really good. Get it to help with brainstorming ideas for what you want to write about, help with the structure, and check by all means for legibility and readability, but it has to be your statement. I think generally this seems to be a reasonable rule of thumb there. It's good. Let's play the thing. Okay, here we go. Rory Sutherland, Adman.
However, I realise I'm showing my age by showing a handwritten essay here, whereas, of course, you young people get your parents to type them for you. No, anyway, but the value wasn't in the essay. The actual end product is worthless. Okay? What's valuable is the effort you had to put in to produce the essay. Now, what AI essays do is they shortcut from the request to the delivery of the finished good and bypass the very part of the journey which is actually valuable, which is the time and effort you invest in constructing the essay in the first place. The essay is worthless, okay? You'll never go and reread it, and if you do, you're embarrassed. What was valuable about that essay was the effort required.
And persuading your IB diploma programme students that the point of that is the thinking and the reading and the effort that goes into writing the diploma essay. It's really tough these days when they know they can cheat very easily at that and may or may not, depending on their confidence in school systems, get caught. Again, this DFE consultation survey, this worry that children with learning difficulties will become reliant on these adaptations and these tools and never move into that fully autonomous, independent learning space. As a parent, my son has dyslexia, so he has to program in text. The computer processes it and helps him type it to be useful for that, but you don't want him to rely on that. It's the calculator argument and the machine translation argument. And we've heard, I think, yesterday about the MIT study about, they'd put people into the functional magnetic resonance machines, some of whom had used just ChatGPT or one of the others to write essays. Some of them who've been banned from doing that had to do it by hand. You look at the connections in their brain and surprise, surprise, the ones who did the work for themselves have better brains than the ones who just copied the work from the machine. Control-C, Control-V does not make many synaptic connections. I have examples of academic misconduct work where I have read the essay more than the student who submitted it had read the essay. Anybody familiar with the text? Very good, sir. Well done. Thank you. Right. It's words Plato put into the mouth of Socrates about why writing was a really bad idea back in ancient Greece, yeah? Because once the kid learns to read and write, they stop listening and they can just appear to be wise because they've read what other people have said rather than actually thought about that or engaged in arguments about this. So, this blaming of technology for, the kids of today goes back quite a long way. And it's very, very hard to argue with that. And so, essentially Plato's argument is that writing, or Plato says Socrates' argument, is that writing is this notion of the pharmacon, from which we get pharmacy, of course, that the things you can get over the counter are in a small dose, they help, they are good for you, they make things better. But if you become over-reliant on these, then that is addiction and positively harmful. And so, Plato says, Socrates says, writing is a pharmacon, that it is both blessing and curse. And I think we are now at the position in the Vegarif Caseborn paper of recognizing that the generative AI is blessing, but can also be curse, that over-reliance on this, akin to addiction, isn't going to be in anybody's best interest. This ties in so well with our keynote today. Should learning be hard? Do you want to make it as easy as possible for the kids in your class to learn things? I don't think many of you want to make it as hard as possible for them to learn things. But from the first talk of the day, if nowhere else, the things that have stuck with you over all of the years since you were at school are the things you really struggled with at the time, where you had to put that effort in to understand it. And along comes the AI these days and says, you don't have to worry about that, I've got this for you, you just carry on, enjoy your life. And I think that can genuinely be harmful. The thing I want to say about this quote, though, is there are many of your pupils for whom all of school is incredibly hard already. Just being able to read the thing is way harder than it is for the kids who are sat alongside them. Being able to understand you speaking in your mother tongue is way harder for them because they have so little of that language. And so for them, they're putting so much effort in to just coping with text or coping with spoken language or whatever, that for them, I don't want to make it any harder for them and taking away some of those particular barriers so the content of the lesson, the content of the activity retains its challenge, and that's the thing where they make the progress with. We end with the Willingham quote, memory is the residue of thought. The more you think about something, the more likely it is that you'll remember it. And the AI that comes along and says, you don't need to think about that, doesn't help any of your pupils remember it. But if it's the only way for them, if it's a way for them to access the content of the thing, I would see that as much, much less harmful. I don't know. You may feel very differently about this. I am going to attempt to figure out where